Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, brothers and sisters, if you can have a seat, and so we're going to start shortly, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we just have some technical issues. Once we inshallah finish get them done, inshallah, now we start. So, a couple of minutes, and thank you, jazakumullah khair for your patience, inshallah.
All right. We're going to go ahead and get us started, inshallah. Sure. Okay. What is inshallah? See? Assalamu alaikum. At this time, I'd like to call Dr. Bilal King and Imam Khalid Shahu to the podium. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه تسليما. We begin by praising God, who is Lord of all the worlds, and we invoke God's blessings and peace and salutations upon the Prophet Muhammad, his family and his companions. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. Greetings of peace. It is my great pleasure to open our Black History Month program reflecting on the legacy of the martyr Malcolm X 60 years later. Inshallah, we will start our program by inviting our beloved Imam Khalid to the podium to start us off with the recitation from the Holy Quran. So Imam Khalid, if you will grace us with a recitation, thank you so much.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصمه ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون. وإذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب وإذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب أجيب دعوة الداعي إذا دعان فليستجيبوا لي وليؤمنوا بي لعلهم يرشدون. آمنت بالله لا إله إلا الله سيدنا محمد رسول الله.
Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward you, Imam Khalid, for that beautiful recitation. My name is Zainab Ansari, and I am your MC for tonight, and it really gladdens my heart to see this diverse gathering, members of the Muslim community as well as our friends and supporters with us tonight. Now, before we introduce our esteemed guest speaker, I'd like to just offer a quick translation of the Quranic verses that were recited. So Imam Khalid began with Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Praise be to Allah, praise be to God, Lord of all the worlds, the most compassionate, the most merciful, master of the day of judgment. You alone do we worship, and you alone do we ask for help. Show us the straight path, the path of those whom you have blessed, not the path of those who have earned your anger or of those who have gone astray. Ameen. And then the following recitation, Imam Khalid shared with us two beautiful ayahs from chapter 2 of the Quran, Al-Baqarah, or the chapter of the cow or the heifer that has very important significance in the story of Moses, Musa alayhi salam, and the children of Israel. So verse 2, 185, Ramadan is the month in which the Quran was revealed as a guide for humanity, with clear proofs of guidance and the decisive authority. So whoever is present this month, let them fast. But whomever is ill or on a journey, then let them fast an equal number of days after Ramadan. God intends ease for you, not hardship, so that you may complete the prescribed period and proclaim the greatness of God for guiding you, and perhaps you will be grateful. And when my servants ask you, O Prophet, about me, I am truly near. I respond to one's prayer when they call upon me. So let them respond with obedience to me and believe in me. Perhaps they will be guided to the right way. Sadaqallahu al-Azim, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's word is always the truth. Now it is my great pleasure to begin our program with an introduction to our speaker and the theme for tonight. So this is Friday, February 21, and this day, today, marks 60 years to the day that Malcom X, or Al-Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz, was martyred. May God have mercy upon him and accept him. So we felt very strongly that we really wanted to be able to bring this program to our community members. There is so much in the life of Malcom X, God rest his soul, Allah yarhamu, that is so relevant and timely for our community today, and that is the intention behind tonight's program. I do have to apologize for the delay in getting started. We were trying to sort out the tech. We might get it connected. Dr. Bilal has a really nice overhead for you, but at any rate, don't worry, you are in good hands with Dr. Bilal tonight. And so, we had a bit of a delay, but alhamdulillah, it allowed time for all of us to navigate rush hour traffic and be seated. And so I want to begin by acknowledging Imam Khalid and Sheikh Hassan. Without your interest in and support of this program, we would not have been able to move forward with tonight's vital program. And thank you to our sponsors, the Muslim community of Knoxville, An-Nur Academy of Knoxville, and Taysir Seminary. We are so grateful for the synergy that exists amongst our sister organizations in Knoxville. And a shout out to our volunteers and staff, students, alumni, and everybody that is making this evening possible, and all the food that's being delivered. May Allah reward you. So I have, of course, Dr. King's official bio. So you read the flyer, you know that Dr. Mansa Bilal King is an associate professor at Morehouse College, specializing in Africana Muslims, African American families, and Black-white racial reconciliation. But I also want to talk about the unofficial bio, just for a minute, inshallah. So, I was dropping hints to my Islam in America students, so raise your hands, Taysir students and alumni, please. Let's recognize alhamdulillah, quite a few in the room. Great to see you. So I was dropping hints in my Islam in America class that we, inshallah, we're trying our best to have an in-person Black History Month program. At first I was thinking, okay, we're going to be on Zoom. I'm like, no, I want us to be in the masjid, in the house of Allah, enjoying the suhbah, the companionship of our community, and benefiting from our speaker. So I'm dropping hints. I'm like, we might have a speaker coming from Morehouse College. And so one of the ladies was like, what is Morehouse College? I'm like, only the most storied HBC in the entire country, ya Jama'a, historically black college and university, the alma mater of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So I am really pleased to say that, alhamdulillah, we have a Dr. King with us tonight from a Morehouse College, alhamdulillah. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Bilal some years back when I was in Atlanta, so this is a really nostalgic moment. Dr. Bilal is someone that my dad and my husband, Allah yarhamhuma, were incredibly fond of Dr. Bilal. I remember the dinners and the gatherings and how Dr. Bilal shared with us his story of his journey to Islam. And then, mashallah, I was able to meet his lovely bride from Ghana, Sister Fakira. And then I had a chance to attend the aqiqah of their eldest daughter. And alhamdulillah, the whole family is with us tonight. So Dr. Bilal, Sister Fakira, girls, we are so happy to welcome you to Muslim community of Knoxville. So I think with that, I don't think you all are here to, you're not here to listen to me tonight. You want to hear Dr. King. So shall we get started? Inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dr. Bilal King.
Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh. Are we also online, even though we don't have the visuals? We're streaming online? Okay. So, they do see. To those in the room as well as those beyond Knoxville, thank you all. Warm welcome. Knoxville's traffic was no joke, as was Atlanta's. We left Atlanta early this morning, so traffic on both ends. Thanks it takes here. I want to thank this community hosting. I want to thank school. Like flashback for those who weren't here. I was here 5 years. And just the warmth that we were received with when my baby girl was, was 9 months old at the time. And to really tell you how personal this talk gets for me, because 2020 was the year COVID shut the world down, right? The year that we introduced our firstborn child to public schooling. He had been homeschooled up until that point, so age put her in the 2nd grade. And I heard the Black History Month programming they were doing, and I was like, we're definitely going to have to augment, as I thought we would have to, with the home education continuing. And it's things like Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz Malcom that even if they get mentioned, I don't think she was mentioned in the schooling program, that even when they get mentioned, it's a quick brush by. Often it's a caricature, one aspect or another of him. So just want to, thank everyone for coming out to have a conversation about this man who has influenced so many people. Can't see this. I'm actually very cool with walking up and making sure that you can see, because the picture that I have on the screen right now, matter of fact, for folks online, if you open a new tab and Google Great Mosque or Mosque of Jenne, Ejenne, you'll see this same video. They can't see. I'll turn it all the way to you, see. Right? I want you to have this in mind as I talk about the idea of Brother Malcolm. The first thing I thought of when I thought of the legacy, why does he matter 60 years later? First thing, not necessarily, I don't like rank ordering things, so it's the first thing I'll talk about. Is not necessarily the most important thing, but for some people it is the most important. For some people, this is a whole, not just room, but like warehouse or block or city or world that becomes illuminated that was previously. And that is Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, really forces us to ask questions about and or recognize Islam indigenized. It doesn't mean that Islam isn't universal, right? But when we talk about Islam indigenized, we're talking about understanding Islam in terms of principles more so than fixed rule. And that has great meaning when you start talking about retention of culture and identity. Right? I would contrast Islam indigenized with a different closely related concept that also is part of his life, which is indigenously constructed Muslim identity. So if you know anything about Malcolm X's story, when he comes into, we could say, when he comes into dialogue with, something Islamic, but definitely when he begins to develop a Muslim identity, he's with the Nation of Islam. And most Muslims on planet Earth would be like, I think that's Islam, they're teaching, right? And so rather than get into debates about whether the Nation of Islam is teaching Islam or not, I would use a term like an indigenously constructed Muslim identity group because they're still connected, deeply connected, in the United States, formatively connected to the presence and vibrancy of Islam in Black America, regardless of whether what they were teaching is or isn't Islam. He forces us to have a level of respect for the work that they have been doing since the 1930s, but also forces us to study that early period of Muslim community formation in the early 1900s in Black America, because that was a reclamation of an identity and a reclamation of tradition, but it also wasn't exclusively the Nation of Islam. So that's kind of an aside, right, to put into perspective his Nation of Islam stage, but his post-Nation of Islam stage is one of the versions of Islam indigenized. We all know he made Hajj. We all know he was on Hajj. He learned how to make salat, right? All the things that we do that we're like, okay, now you took Shahadatain, you Muslim. We're not questioning whether you're Muslim, whether you're practicing Islam. But when he came back to the United States, he established two organizations, right? One was an Islamic organization, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, but the other was the Organization of African American Unity, OAAU. So he never saw the need for a Muslim to jettison their cultural or ethnic identity. And for anyone who's not aware of this, there is a phenomenon, not just in Black America, certainly in Black America, where there's a strong split between those who are clear that our culture has to come with us into Islam in recognizable ways. I don't stop being a Black man, a Black American man, just because I'm Muslim. And on the other side of that fence, there are those, literally, I had a student take Shahada 2 years ago, and within a week, he ran into some brothers who told him, Black history and Islam, oh, that's some slave stuff, right? Which is a very insulting response, to put it mildly. Hold on a second. So that visual that I gave you, right, represents how indigenized Islam produced a masjid. Tradition, that's not just one masjid. That is the traditional, what we call idiom, or the traditional form of a masjid all across West Africa prior to concerns about modernization as Westernization and modernization for Muslims as Arabs, right? When you go there now, you will not see a new masjid looking like this. They're building new masajid, look like something from the Middle East or something from South Asia. And that becomes problematic because you lose an entire 800 to 1,000 year history because you don't have a full understanding of the importance of culture in Islam. And there's a deeper irony to that we can get into when we talk about the place of culture in Maliki. But that's just important to process. And I would invite anyone hop on a Google search and look at what a masjid looked like traditionally in China. Right? There are estimates of 50 million Chinese Muslims, although the state of China has been trying to reduce that number west lately. But they have ways of building masajid that also don't look like, right, what may seem to be presented to you as what a masjid is supposed to look like if you're unaware, right? And so there are traditions of indigenizing Islam all around the planet that have thrived for centuries all around the planet. And Brother Malcolm, just by being who he was, pushes him to look at that, consider it, and I would argue to accept it. I know there could be arguments. Connected to that indigenized Islam, West Africa, is the fact that Malcolm, I don't know if you've ever seen this photo of Brother Malcolm, went to West Africa, right? And when he went to West Africa, he found a bunch of Muslims that he was connecting with. Muslims who came from societies often that have been Muslim for 1,000 years. So, right? Islam has been developing in the region, Islam has been documented in the region a solid 1,000 years. So, it's probably not a surprise to anyone anymore when we talk about the fact that the bulk of the story of Muslims in America is an African story. And at a certain point, it stops being clearly simply African, so we might use the word, it's an Africana story. Black Americans, we are connected to Africa, we have cultural similarities. Caribbean Americans, same thing, a lot more retentions are clear, but that's the bulk of the history of Islam in America. And it goes back, well documented and undebated, to the 1500s. First enslaved African Muslims documented in what becomes the United States, 1526, right? Earlier archaeological evidence, some oral history evidence, among other things, suggests that they may have been some West African Muslims in the Americas as early as the 1300s, right? But that has not been accepted by Western historians, right? The gatekeepers in academia, still always worth mentioning, always worth mentioning. So given that that's like the bulk of our history, when we talk about Muslim American history, we always want to be someone who's familiarized themselves with it. And you can't leave Malcolm out of that, nor can you leave all of that out if you're getting to know Malcolm. I find that's part of his legacy, part of what makes him important. 60. Another important point that's related to him founding the Organization of African American Unity is that Malcolm is unquestionably, and this really won't work so well because I was going to play Ozzie Davis reading part of the eulogy of Malcolm to convey this point better than I could ever do. I'm not an Oscar-winning actor, but Malcolm was a guiding light in the Black freedom struggle. And what I've learned over the years is a lot of people don't actually learn a well-grounded conceptual framework for understanding the Black freedom struggle. So I'm going to take a second, I'm going to talk about the struggle, then we're going to place Malcolm in the struggle, okay? So since the first person was successfully oppressed because they had African appearance or ancestry and fought back, the Black freedom struggle has existed. It's not uniquely a United States of America phenomenon. This has taken place in multiple lands over a long period of time. And as a result of that, right, activities in the struggle have included different strategies. So nonviolence has been a strategy, but so has violence. Responding to violence with violence, also known as self. Intellectual production, right? Resistance in the form of writing books, giving talks, schooling, creating alternatives. That is all, right, in the discussion of strategy. but there are also movements. And here I will draw heavily from United States history just because some of the movements we always talk about. I'm a sociologist. The abolitionist movement, the movement to end legalized slavery. Lots of people talk about the civil rights movement. We're going to revisit that discussion because it becomes problematic to the extent that we don't know other movements. Black nationalist movement, Pan-Africanist movement. These are all movements. These are all elements of the struggle where you had a great deal of energy going on and activities implemented by individuals and organizations. And those are also part of the struggle. Organizations like the Nation of Islam, like Southern Christian Leadership Conference, like the International Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. These are all organizations that are part of the Black freedom struggle in the United States. But groups that organized and rebelled quite successfully in some places like Haiti are also part, right, of the Black freedom struggle. And sometimes communities constructed may endure a short period of time, may endure a long period of time. So as a national community, Haiti is de facto part of the Black freedom because they have managed just to survive after overthrowing a slave occupancy, a race-based slave occupancy, right? But similarly, 100 years lived community like Palmares in Brazil, where enslaved Africans ran away and hid off in the swamps and the mountains, right, elsewhere, and managed to keep a community going for 100 years before the government shut them down. That's part of the Black freedom struggle. Right? And you can get into some blurry areas. Do we have anybody here from India or Pakistan background? Family came here from Pakistan. If you're familiar with Siddhis and the Habshis of India, they're often called Shidis in Pakistan. They're also often called Makranis in Pakistan. Well, the ones particularly who ended up political elites, and some at the highest level of political elites. So the kingdom of Janjira was ruled by formerly enslaved East Africans, right, who had a kingdom running in India from the 1600s until 1948. Many of us see that as part of the Black freedom struggle. To the extent that they did or did not see themselves as connected to other people due to African ancestry, right, that might be debatable. But when we look at the history of people of dark skin being excluded from so many things, we tend to say, no, that's part of it. That's an achievement. When's the last time you heard about Black people being in authority over not Black people, let alone for 400, 300? It's an uncommon kind of thing to happen, so it stands out, right? But I would invite everybody, because I also need to stay in my time limit. I would invite everyone, if you have never had a chance to place Malcolm in the Black freedom struggle, listen to, go on YouTube, you can Google this, Ossie Davis, Ossie Davis, Ossie Davis, eulogy of Malcolm X. A better way to catch it is to watch Spike Lee, another Morehouse alum. I'm not a Morehouse alum, by the way. I make Morehouse music, what I do. Spike Lee made a movie in the 1990s called Malcolm X. He changed some pieces of the story, but he included Ossie Davis's reading of that. It's to this day still very powerful. Okay, I mentioned this earlier. The civil rights movement was a part of the Black freedom struggle, no question. However, and this is really important, Malcolm X was not a civil rights activist. If you said to Malcolm X that he would have corrected you and said, I am not interested in civil rights. Why? Because civil rights is about making sure that citizens of a country have their rights fully respected, and by the government, right? Malcolm's vision was bigger than that. He was not only concerned with you if you were a citizen, And his goal was not to be a part of the United States of America's government, which had shown an incapacity or unwillingness consistently to deal with the issues that black folk are facing, not only by the 1960s, but to today, right? It's a pretty solid argument one could make that has not really changed, although there was a vacation from the 60s until arguably the 80s with Reagan, or maybe, the 21st century. But right, the position that Malcolm took was, we have natural God-given rights, and it doesn't matter if we're a citizen of your country or not. If you refuse to respect those rights, then we're going to have to make you respect them, not ask you to respect them. Civil rights is about asking, or even trying to pressure a little bit, but ultimately asking someone else to respect your rights. The way that Malcolm approached human rights was, you're going to respect my rights or I'm going to die making sure that I tried to get them. And that's different from asking. That's demanding. Right? So I think that's important, because even the most, what's the word I want to use, the most frequently cited civil rights leader, Martin Luther King Jr., by the way, no relation, as far as we know, just happened. Martin Luther King Jr., by the end of his time, not just his life, but even his time in the public spotlight, he had begun to say things that moved him beyond civil rights. That speech that he gave, known as Beyond Vietnam, you could easily call that beyond civil rights. He's starting to talk about the human rights that people who are not U.S. citizens need to have respected, and that to the extent that the United States government undermines, does not respect, contravenes those rights, our government is in the wrong, right? And he came from the tradition of dead white guys like Emerson and Thoreau that said, if your laws are unjust, we do not have to respect your laws. Your laws are illegitimate, right? But we may respect them even in our attempts to change them, respect your legal process. So civil rights, human rights is a distinction that I found many people don't make, and it's to be. All right, I'm going to speed through the last, I think, 2, 3. El-Hajj Malik Shabazz showed us that the struggle, or lots, right, you could say the struggle for black Americans to get it right, or the struggle for, right, the black freedom struggle. But that struggle is both local and global. It's not one or the other. And that is extremely relevant today, because what I've heard and what many people I know have heard has been a magnification of voices in certainly black America, but not exclusive to black America. Circles of freedom fighters have been turning towards a kind of xenophobic nationalism. There is a sort of closing of ranks, imagined boundaries, where the problems of folks outside of our community are no longer to be put on the same par. And that's not how Malcolm approached it. And that's not how a lot of us understand it, because when we listen to our elders, what they told us was, you're not dealing with a group of people who run America who are interested in not respecting your rights. You're dealing with a global cabal of colonizers. Some of them are settler colonizers. Some of them are not settlers, but they're administratively, economically, right, institutionally colonizing all around the world. And if you are only dealing with them locally, you're outgunned, outnumbered, outleveraged, etc. And if you're not acknowledging that you have comrades going through the exact same thing that you're going through, or a slightly different version of it, who happen to live in other countries, you are failing to address a global phenomenon. You're just pushing against one little piece of something that, oh, we push here, we got 5 over the other hands over here, right? And so for Malcolm, what was happening in South Africa was entirely relevant to what's happening in the United States, but what was happening in Palestine, entirely relevant to what's happening in the United States. What's happening in the Congo, entirely, like, these are all interconnected. They're not separate because they have separate political ruling groups. They are connected because the global colonizing project is not yet over. Does that make sense? So Malcolm gives us that. And, back in the day, even when I was a student in the 90s, which somehow has become a long time ago, we used the phrase third world solidarity. That's not really the word that's used anymore. Third world has, kind of lost its potency as an analytical tool. But you've got an entire school of thinkers that we call post-colonial thinkers, right? Edward Said and his students, and some folks in sociological theory have said, you know what? What Edward Said was talking about is actually no different than what W.B. Du Bois was talking about X number of decades previous. That there's a continuum. Post-colonial theory is not as recent as, right? And so you don't have to limit it to terms like third world solidarity. There are a number of different ways that you can refer to this, but it all gets to the same idea. Okay. I want to say two more pieces. They're very much interconnected, like many of these have been, and then let's have some conversation. Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X showed us that the masses, the everyday people, can produce leaders who rival any other. He was a child of the foster care system. He was a child of parents who were not particularly affluent. He was, God's sakes, the man lived in Oklahoma. Now, if you know anything about the way hierarchies work in America, Oklahoma is not high on anybody's where you're from list, right? But he illustrates something that's important. What we know is imperialists, which is another reference to colonizing, right? Imperialists always, consistently seek to co-opt natural leaders. And sometimes they succeed. But if they can't co-opt natural leaders, they will create artificial leaders. And I'm familiar with stories in West Africa where people didn't have a chief, and the colonizer just created a chief because that's how we're going to organize you so we can rule you, right? And, you can always find someone willing to be that because there's always someone whose morals are not particularly high or whose vision is not particularly broad. Right? So in that context, you have someone like Malcolm who was clearly both a natural leader and a leader whose organizing skills were refined. A natural intellect and an intellect whose intellectual skills were refined. Right? He was an A student. If you remember his story, he was an A student when he was a little kid in school before the family was disrupted. So he was sharp in the ways that people think you need to be sharp. But he was also pretty successful when he became a street runner, criminal. He did all right as a criminal. And what, in a strange way, served him well is that his education in the schooling system, his schooling was disrupted. So that later on, when his education continued, it was able to be unbounded by the institutional boundaries that would typically serve to co-opt the best and the brightest without having to do a whole lot of work, right? Many of the people who challenged Malcolm from the black community, they weren't as successful or natural organizer he was. They weren't as motivational a speaker as he was, but they were put on a pedestal by people who had an interest in silencing the kind of voice that Malcolm was, i.e. they were co-opted by the imperialists. So that becomes really important to think about because at the end of the day, there's some folks who'll be like, listen, Malcolm was just a jailbird. And what the response to that is maybe he was a jailbird, but you know how many Malcolms potentially are in jail right now? Right? And then that raises, right, his legacy becomes something that pushes us to raise the question, what are we doing to try to cultivate? What are we doing to try to bring out the next Malcolm from jail? It's a uncomfortable question. often to be raised in circles where we had good professional jobs. We're trying to push our kids to these, lives that disconnect them from the streets, disconnect them especially from incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, and soon to be incarcerated people. But fact still remains that the people most likely to be able to function outside of the restraints that institutional schooling places on us, which means it trains us to not even ask certain questions. We have to work really, really hard to think outside of the boxes that they give us while they're telling us that they're training us to think outside the box. A lot of those people are probably in jail. And given the recent political changes in our country, I'll leave it as vague as that, there probably are going to be a whole lot more, not a whole lot fewer. In fact, well, I'll leave it there. There probably will be a whole lot more. I know of some Muslims today, some with fairly decent, comfortable professional jobs, and some who are pretty much activists, but who are engaged in this work of reaching out to, supporting during and or after, right, folks who are incarcerated. And the importance of that work cannot be made more clear than to simply say, Malcolm was a jailbird. Right? And I don't know when or if we'll forget Malcolm, but I do know that there's a good chance there's some more Malcolms waiting for us. So thinking about how we can engage that is probably one of the most important pieces of his legacy that remain with us. On that note, I will end and open up for Q&A conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Bilal. Jazakallah khair. We benefited greatly from your insights, and I look forward to the dialogue that I'd like to have. I also know that we're running a little bit behind time, so I'll ask Imam Khalid first because we wanted Imam Rafiq to offer a reflection in response to your presentation. So Imam Khalid, what is your preference at this time? Because I know Aisha is also about to start. Okay, so inshallah, that is the plan. We are going to have Aisha prayer, and then we are going to welcome Imam Rafiq to reflect on Dr. Bilal's presentation and then take some audience Q&A. How does that sound? All right, Jazakallah khair.